Hello, Africa, and welcome to this exclusive episode here on DW Africa. I'm your host, Josey Mahachi. Joining me now is the Minister of Finance and Investment Promotion from the Republic of Zimbabwe, Honorable Minister Mthuli. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So you've been here at the annual meetings the whole week. Can you just take us through the whole process to the point that you elected a new president for the bank?
Thank you very much. We're so pleased that the bank chose a very important theme for the annual meeting, which is how to get Africa to use its capital more effectively for its own development. I think that really speaks of the times that we're in, which is that there is a dwindling of ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. So it's very important for Africa to raise its own resources, either public resources in terms of domestic resource mobilization. That way, additional taxes and whatever, use those resources efficiently, and also additional resources for the private sector. So the theme was very important. As Zimbabwe, we kicked off with a special side event to discuss and update partners on the debt arrears clearance process. The discussions was well received. We were able to give them an update on what we've covered in terms of compensation farmers mainly from Europe, and then also in terms of restoring property rights around land, governance changes that we've made, governance reforms, but finally economic reforms that we've made on the currency, on the fiscal front, issues on the staff monitoring program. So we're able to give them an update on all of this, and this was well received indeed. We're left encouraged that we should continue and see this arrears clearance process through. After that, then we went into some of the statutory meetings, as you can imagine, on how to process of electing a new president. We agreed on modalities for that criteria. Then interviewing the candidates, we did that. Then eventually we voted, and now we have a new president from Mauritania, and we all, as African governors, stand behind him to lead this bank for the betterment of our countries in Africa. Of course, there were so many other side events, like, for example, the Bankers Awards. They do that quite successfully. Then knowledge events, including the Governors' Dialogue, focusing on youth and entrepreneurship, all manner of things, all the key development issues in Africa were handled during this annual meeting. It's been a very successful annual meeting, culminating in the election of a new president.
Right. Now let's come back to Zimbabwe, our country, talking about the currency stability and inflation that you just touched on. How sustainable is the newly reintroduced Zimbabwe gold ZiG Currency? It's not new anymore. And what's the government doing differently this time to prevent further collapse?
Thanks very much. Since we introduced the ZiG, we're pleased that it has remained stable. We did, cause a depreciation in September last year, which was necessary. That was actually a policy decision. It was not the market decision. But since then, it's been very stable, and we're pleased with this. We have seen the figures when it comes to month-on-month inflation. Those have remained low. But of course, if you look at year-on-year inflation on the ZiG front, then the figures look high. But I can tell you that it is just a statistical effect. It's a base effect. But really, inflation is under control. What we had was the typical transmission of exchange rate volatility and weakness into inflation. So by having a stable ZiG, we've managed to break that transmission from the exchange rate to inflation. So what's different this time? When we launched the currency, we launched it as a structured currency backed by gold in the main, and other reserves, US dollars and other reserves. But all the other royalties that we also earn from other minerals other than gold are also converted into gold. So we've got a stable stock of reserves which is growing. We have a program for accumulating those reserves. And every time we're trying to match to see whether what we have in reserves is adequate to back the currency. And since the launch of the currency on the 4th of April last year, 2024, we've maintained reserves that more than match the ZiG in circulation. So we're confident that it will be stable just on the basis of that reserve coverage metric. But beyond that, we again run tight monetary policy in terms of liquidity, whether looking at the growth of I'm using a technical term, M0 reserve money. Our idea is that we must really manage liquidity well, and the central bank has been doing that quite well. And then on the fiscal front, because Treasury can also be a source of liquidity growth, we've made sure that we live within our means, we run tight budgets, and I think we're on this year to achieve a deficit to GDP ratio of 0.4% of GDP in terms of our budget deficit. So things are quite tight. We're running things well, and there's good coordination between the central bank and Treasury. And I can assure you that in the last 4 years, we've not had recourse to the window, the overdraft window at the central bank. Government, I've said, cannot borrow from the central bank, so we've stayed away from that, because by borrowing from central bank, we're actually printing money. So again, this is part of our liquidity management strategy, which has been so successful. And then a phenomenon that I think should augurs well for the currency as well is the state of the balance of payments. When you compare exports versus imports and remittances, again, this is a record. For the 6th year in a row, 6 years in a row, again, we have a positive balance on our current account. This actually augurs well for the currency, for us to know that there's more money coming in to the country than flowing out. That helps to stabilize the currency. So I would say that portfolio of things is really helping. Recently, we got rid of this rule that those who are setting prices in the shops and wherever have to set them using the official rate. And now there's no reference to that. We've allowed that to operate freely. And again, it has contributed towards building confidence in the currency. So you can see we've applied a bouquet of measures, a portfolio of measures to make this work.
Now, speaking of confidence, what safeguards are in place to maintain public and investor confidence in the new currency? Because it looks like when it comes to Zimbabweans, there's mixed reactions.
Yeah. Well, look, the currency has been stable. I think really it is stability that will sell the currency, that will increase the confidence within the public eye on this currency. So by keeping it stable, as long as that stability endures, that's what will build confidence. Frankly, it has to be stability and nothing else.
Now let's go to the debt, the public debt and IMF engagement. Zimbabwe's external debt burden remains high, and talks with international lenders like the IMF and World Bank are ongoing, according to your presentation. But what progress has Zimbabwe made on debt restructuring, and how close is the country to re-engaging with international financial institutions?
As I said earlier, we're able to give an update here at this annual meeting on progress. So far, we've made very good progress in terms of the reforms along the three key pillars, which is economic reforms, governance reforms, as well as then the land farmer compensation reforms. We now even issue title deeds in terms of the land pillar. So I feel that we've made a lot of progress. Just even the introduction of the ZiG alone, which is stable, was part of the reforms that we undertook on the economic pillar. The abolition of the death penalty was a major achievement under the government's pillar, and the introduction of title deeds, as I said, is a major compensation of the farmers as per the constitution. We're just following a constitutionalist, all those are key developments that have really supported this process. So now we're at a stage now where we are engaging with the IMF to embark on a staff monitored program. The IMF will be visiting the country next week. Hopefully then we will conclude and have a meeting of minds, and then we start. We envisage a 9-month staff monitored program with quarterly assessments. So we hope to then complete that successfully. As we embark on the staff monitored program, we should also use that moment to look for what you call sponsors who can give us bridge financing. Because the way it works, it's a technical process that requires someone, typically one of the creditors, to give you literally a 24-hour loan. In fact, it's a 3-hour loan. Yeah.
How does that work?
It's amazing. So the way it works is currently we are in arrears, so we cannot access money from the soft window, which is the AIDA window, the World Bank, or the ADF window in the African Development Bank. We can't access. But the moment there's a sponsor who says, Zimbabwe, there is a $2.5 billion, go pay up the World Bank and the FDB for arrears, suddenly we are current. So the moment that country pays on our behalf, we become current, we're no longer in arrears, we can then access money from the soft window, and then we refund or pay back the lender of that bridge loan. The whole process takes about 3 hours. So all we need is a 3-hour loan. That's why it's important, therefore, to build trust through this reform agenda that we've been on. It's a trust-building exercise, but also it's real reforms at the same time. But the trust is key. That's what will unlock this bridge financing. So we hope then to identify 2-3 countries who can help us with this process. It can't be a burden for one country, it's too big. We need 2 or 3 countries to share the burden. Then after that, we have to get into, once you restructure or rather clear the arrears for the World Bank, FDB, and also European Investment Bank, EIB is part of it. Then we can move on to phase 2, which is restructuring of the Paris Club debt, the bilateral country-to-country debt. Then also at that point, then maybe negotiate what we call an upper credit tranche UCT program with the IMF, because then we're back into the family of global nations, so we're also able to access those kind of programs. That is the roadmap. But we're also saying that while that is the roadmap, we also shouldn't be, we also should be creative and look for ways where we as a country can also have skin in the game. Are there some structures that we can put together using some of our assets, maybe even asset disposal, to raise the bridge financing? So using our own assets to raise bridge financing. So we're looking at ways where we want to be creative so that we don't just rely on a single or sponsor, but we also want to have a skin in the game. So that is where we are headed with this roadmap.
And speaking of reforms, even during your presentation, this word kept coming up, reforms. What economic or political reforms are being requested by these lenders, and is the government willing to implement them?
First of all, the lenders are not requesting reforms. We are the ones who feel these reforms are necessary. For instance, when we had the Zimbabwe dollar and it was wobbly, it was volatile, clearly something had to be done. So the introduction of the ZiG was our initiative. And in fact, when we introduced the ZiG, there were complaints in the global financial circles that maybe we're going back to the gold standard, and so forth and so forth. And that is not the case. So it was our initiative, and we're challenging the world on how best to introduce a new currency under the circumstances. So these are our own reforms. The reforms we've taken in tightening things in the fiscus, value for money reforms that we've introduced. Most people don't even know that we've introduced a whole internal audit process, not in Treasury, not just in Treasury, but the entirety of government. That is new for any country, not even African country, for any country. So these are reforms that we ourselves feel are necessary for us to run things properly. And we've said to them, look at what we are doing. You can come in and mark us on what we said we will do. So they act as the markers, but not the dictators. So I want to be clear in terms of how these reforms are taking place. So when we're talking about, let's say, a staff-monitored program to anchor the economic reform pillar, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about fiscal prudence. We've already demonstrated fiscal prudence the last 5 years. Our average budget deficit has never gone above 3% of GDP. That's a record. You look at what we've done on the, as I said, current account side. Again, we've always run a positive balance on the current account. Look at monetary policy. Yes, maybe we've been on and off, but our commitment to tight monetary policy is clear. And positive real interest rates is very clear now, especially under the ZiG. So these are normal tools that you use to run an economy properly. So no one dictates that. That's what we must do. So when we invite the world to say, come and take a look at what we are doing, that's what it is. They're just coming to tick and so forth because we've made certain commitments. So the economic France does that. When it comes to governance part, We have been using the Mo Ibrahim index indicators, Transparency International indicators, and the World Justice Project indicators and so forth. And again, we're making progress. I mean, we tried, I think, 3 times before to remove the death penalty. It's not easy. Finally, we did it. You recall when there was...
But some minister, just to interject there, some say that it's because Zimbabwe couldn't get someone to do that job, that particular job, that for years, that advert to get someone who does that job of just killing these prisoners was not there. Is that true?
No. but do you remove a law because you can't find someone to hire? I know.
That I have to ask you because that's what people are saying.
It cannot be. It cannot be. It's because there was a willingness from the president and also cabinet. Remember, the president himself survived a death penalty. So I know that he feels very strongly. So to some of us, I don't believe in a death penalty, for example. So I'm clearly one of those who voted for that to be changed. And the entire cabinet was unanimous in supporting a change, a removal of that law. So it's nothing to do with the an inavailability of leadership in executing on that mandate, I can assure you. And that's not easy. How do you get that through Parliament? And people have strong views against it. So these are not easy reforms that we're doing ourselves because we think it's good for Zimbabwe. You know, with a whistleblower, laws to protect whistleblowers, child protection bill, independence complaints, a bill and so forth. We've done a lot. Yeah, and now if you look at how we've moved to the e-court system, case management system around our judiciary, the way we are building courts right around the country, make sure there's access to justice right across the country. We've done a lot, frankly, yeah. And at the risk of repeating, coming to the land issue, we are compensating the farmers who are under the global compensation deed agreement, 3.5 billion. Then we're also compensating the farmers who invested their money in the first place after 1980. These are the BIPA farmers, mainly from Europe. And then we're issuing title deeds to Zimbabweans who received offer letters and 99-year leases. These are major reforms that we've undertaken, on those 3 streams. What we want to do is to introduce a 4th category. This is a special, working group that will focus on the mechanics of the arrears clearance specifically, because these are the issues that are dealing with policy issues. But the actual mechanics, which I was describing earlier, we need a special committee to just focus on that. We're going to introduce that committee.
And there's also now triggering public backlash when it comes to government implementing new taxes and hiking existing ones to boost revenue. Your comment on that, Honorable Minister?
I think also there's some confusion. I think some citizens are mixing up regulatory fees.
They feel it's too much, and they feel it's too much.
Yeah, let me explain. Regulatory fees, which are not governed by the Ministry of Finance, confusing that with taxes. Taxes are under the ambit of the Ministry of Finance. So I've also noticed some of the reactions of late, but those are regulatory fees. It's nothing to do with the Ministry of Finance, I must dare say. And those resources don't come to Treasury. They stay with those agencies in the main. They don't come to Treasury at all. We only receive taxes. So, but looking at that, so I want to speak to taxes, then I'll come back to regulatory fees. So on taxes, I think you'll agree with me that we're at an inflection point globally. Overseas development assistance is collapsing fast. Yeah, the announcements from the U.S., if you look at HIV funding through PEPFAR and so forth, that has come down quite drastically. So what do you do? How to plug the gap in supporting those living with the scourge of HIV/AIDS? For example, you have to find the resources within the domestic economy. It's domestic resource mobilization. So what we've done, we think is the right thing to do, which is we've been, we upped 2 years ago. We upped some sin taxes. That's what they are called, sin taxes, on alcohol and cigarettes. And then we also introduced taxes on fast foods, very small, 0.5%.
It might be small, Honorable Minister, but some people will feel like it's a lot.
No, it's small. Yeah, it's small. I think it's fair to say that let's look at pizza. Pizza is not exactly a poor woman or poor man's food. You'll agree with me. Tacos is not a poor man or poor woman's food. That's the middle class. And they too are using hospital facilities. So, most of these foods also tend to be linked to obesity and, and so forth. Now we've got this scourge of the drug and substance abuse from the youth. What do we do with that? It's a serious issue.
And what's happening? How are these drugs coming in, Minister? If we can just deviate a little bit.
I have no idea. If I knew how to arrest whoever was involved, I have no idea. But they're coming in. So this is an issue. Also, I noticed that there's some ingenuity. People manufacture drugs. They have a way of getting powder from some light bulbs. It's scary what you hear. You mix that with silicone from nappies. It's crazy stuff. But there it is. It's very dangerous stuff. It's lethal. So what I did was I then introduced a tax on gambling activity. The view being that kind of tax is what will then target towards dealing rehabilitation of youth who are affected by the drug and substance abuse issue. We have taxes on airtime, for example. And then we've got our stalwart tax, which is the 3% AIDS levy that was introduced almost 20 years ago. And we have to keep going with that. It's very, very important. So we've got this bouquet of taxes which are meant to plug the gap that has been opened up by the collapse of ODA. So it's necessary. And every other country will be doing that. In fact, other countries are trying to learn from Zimbabwe now. Before I came to Abidjan, I was in Geneva, invited by the Global Fund for HIV, malaria, and TB. And we're discussing these issues. And you can see other countries want to learn how is Zimbabwe doing it. And we are on track to close the gap. That gap, we're on track to close the gap. So we have no choice but to have our citizens really pay for their own health. You cannot rely on taxpayers in other countries to pay for our own citizens. We cannot rely on German taxpayers to pay for Zimbabwe citizens. It cannot work like that. But coming to regulatory fees, as government, we were the first to acknowledge that regulatory fees have gone out of control. His Excellency the President, when he opened cabinet this year, said that those regulatory fees must fall. They must be removed, they must be dealt with, and we're dealing with it. Very soon you will hear some announcements where we're going to make some adjustments for some of these regulatory fees, which are necessary, exorbitant, and are just increasing the cost of doing business. So part of the outcry from the public has to do with these regulatory or just fees in general. But I can assure you that these are not necessarily taxes coming to central government. These are fees that are being captured by agencies and regulatory agencies as well.
Now, there used to also be a mantra, Zimbabwe is open for business. Just to talk about that, is that still the case? And are there more investors coming into Zimbabwe right now, or still investors are shying away because of corruption, perceptions, policy inconsistency, and currency instability?
Zimbabwe is open for business, and investors are coming in. They are knocking on our doors every day. ZiDA, Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency, has been busy approving various investors who are coming into the country. I must say that probably our most successful sector in terms of attracting investment has been mining. Why? Because you go where the mineral is. If we have lithium or rare earth minerals, when we have plenty of that, you come to Zimbabwe. So we've had a roaring success in terms of investment in the mining sector. And of course, we've sought to maximize benefit for the country in that sector by insisting on beneficiation. So we've said that those who are mining lithium, for example, must beneficiate to the level of lithium sulfate, lithium carbonate, so that we can maximize on returns for the country, on value for the country. And also the companies must also invest in corporate social responsibility, where 1% of their revenue is spent locally, building schools, maintaining roads, hospitals, clinics. And some of them are doing that. They're doing that. It's actually amazing. If you look at a company, for instance, like Zimplats, which is the platinum sector, they've done an incredible job in dealing with corporate social responsibility issues, providing housing, even developing a small town. I don't know if you've visited that town, Taff. It's amazing. Out of nowhere, there's a new town. But also in the way they've supported, it's a good example on how large companies can support SMEs, small to medium scale enterprises, by including them in the supply chain of whatever they do. So it's a very good example, and I'm happy to talk about the company. They didn't ask me to talk about it.
You're doing an advert now.
Yes. Why? Why? You know why? Because it's an example that we want other companies to copy. We're saying that this is the minimum. If you can replicate what they're doing, then we're making progress. So mining has been a good area for investment. You look at the steel sector, for example. Zimbabwe is now poised to be a steel hub for the region through an investment in the Maniza area. But again, we want to make sure that we maximize on that company by, again, unlocking value for the entire steel chain, value chain. In other words, when it comes to things such as, the manufacturing, is it the railway slippers or something? Yeah, I think that's what it's called, for the railway track. All that is steel. We want to make sure that we can make those locally. You look at what do you call it, the pylons, the towers for the transmission lines for electricity. Those can be made locally from that steel. Supporting the car manufacturing industry with the steels available for us to do that. So we want to unlock an entire value chain around the steel sector, an entire ecosystem, including foundries and so forth. So I could go on and on. If you look at the coking coal, we have some of the best coking coal, and that coking coal is going into the steel value chain, into the ferrochrome value chain. But mining has been our success in terms of foreign direct investment. But then we want to open up other areas, tourism and so forth. In short, Zimbabwe is open for business. It will remain open for business.
Right. Now, as we wrap up our discussion, just to talk about the healthcare system and also rehabilitation centers, as we touched on, a little bit on drugs in the country, what is the government doing, and are there also investors coming in for those industries?
In the health sector, we've been surprised. We've been able to tap into private sector funding. So we're currently building 30 polyclinics across the country, 3 per province. And then we're also building 6 district hospitals across the country. We are now at facility number 4. Those of you who know Zimbabwe can run through it. The first one was in Harare South, in Hoplin. The second one was a polyclinic in Caudry Park in Bulawayo. The third one was in Runyararo in Zushavane. And the fourth one is in, wrong. I think that's Mataga. I think it's called Mataga. I'm mixing up my names. But anyway, Zushavane, let's just say that. And then the fourth one is in Chimanimani. And we're going to open the 5th one. We started working on it in Wedza, and then move on to Umzingwane after that. So we have a clear program, and there'll be 30 of those. But what point am I trying to make? We raised 200 million from an offshore loan for those facilities. We're able to structure it through a guarantee provided by the South African Export Credit Guarantee. So we're able to do that. That's the only way we could access the loan. So what I'm saying is that we're using innovative means to access private sector capital to deliver on health infrastructure. So we're able to do that. And then you combine that now with these taxes that I mentioned earlier to support the actual delivery of services. This is how it ought to work. I'm thinking in the future, we could even get even more innovative and launch what you call a health bond. The way that would work is, would take one of those sin taxes, for example, and quarantine it and ring fence it, and then issue a bond whose coupons, interest payments, will be serviced through that quarantined, sin tax. So we're also exploring that. What that would allow us to do is to raise a lot of capital upfront for deployment into the sector, especially for capital projects, and then we service the loan over time. So as Zimbabwe, we stand ready to be as creative as possible to support our health sector and not just rely on simple taxation. But I've already outlined how we want to assist with that sector.
But you didn't touch on the rehabilitation centers.
Oh, let me come to. We want to know basically about drug. We are building rehabilitation centers across the country to make sure these are available for those who are afflicted by drugs and substance abuse issues. We have a national task force that is chaired by the Minister of Defense. It's a cabinet task force to look into that issue. As I say that we have these additional sin taxes that are being applied to that cause. It's not an easy thing. You asked me earlier, who's bringing in these drugs? It's part of the fight. We have to deal with how these drugs come into the country in the first place. So the issue of law enforcement is critical. What government will be doing as well is launching a whole drug enforcement agency, which is under the Office of the President Cabinet, to really drive our strategy in dealing with this matter, looking after rehabilitation centers, the law enforcement, the resources, the personnel, the strategy, everything, to make sure that we deal a lasting blow on this issue.
Now, your parting words, if you can speak to Zimbabweans, specifically those who believe that your government is doing well, and to those also who feel like, no, Zimbabwean government right now is not doing well. We follow social media posts from different people. Just a minute or so for you to address directly Zimbabweans.
If you want to understand what Zimbabwe is all about, what Zimbabwean government is doing, it's always best to be on the ground. If you rely on social media, you will get it wrong, because what sells on social media is negative. I've never known of a positive piece of news on anything that sells, that catches everyone's attention. It's always the negative part. So I can understand why we get all this negativity, because that's what sells. But to understand Zimbabwe, you need to be on the ground and see it for yourself. I mean, we have some amazing infrastructure projects that we've invested in. And I always think that if we had done this since 1980, the country would be a different country altogether. We've invested a lot in roads using our own resources, again using domestic resources. Just today, the president was inaugurating a very important bypass on the road from Osingo into Harare, the Trabablas bypass. It's an amazing piece of investment. Again, it's from resources directly coming from Treasury. The taxes that we were talking about earlier. The investment we have made in schools. The investment we have made in the power sector, 7 and 8, Kariba South. I don't know, when we were last in Zimbabwe, have you seen the new airport in Harare? I must say new, because it really looks new. It's revamped, it's a world-class facility. So you have to be on the ground to appreciate what's happening in Zimbabwe. If you look at our devolution agenda, it has revolutionized some districts where there was no infrastructure before, schools, water facilities, clinics and so forth. A lot has changed. We've done a lot in the First Republic since we came in 2018. But I encourage Zimbabweans to visit your own home, see it for yourself. Don't rely on social media.
All right. Now, those are your parting words. Don't rely on social media. There you go, Africa. I've been speaking to the Minister of Finance and Investment Promotion in Zimbabwe, Honorable Professor Mthuli Ncube, here on DW Africa. Until the next one, I'm your host, Josey Mahachi. Bye for now.